Hey there, Patches here. In this video, we're going to go over how to get rid of these 3 deprecation warnings if you happen to be using a modern version of Kustomize, which is a tool to help manage your Kubernetes config files. So we have common labels, good old patchesJson6902, as well as patchesStrategicMerge. So throughout this video, we're going to be going over the before and after, or old versus new here, to handle these deprecation warnings one by one. Also, I will mention that all the config files that we're going to be going over, as well as some of the diffs that we're going to be looking at, will be available on my site. I'll leave a link to that one in the description. Also, I will mention here too that the output of this customized build is only showing a service and 2 deployments. And these deployments look pretty bare bones, right? There's not even any containers being defined here. That's because we're going to be focusing only on the components of these config files to address these deprecation warnings. So in this case, we have labels and, selector match labels and template labels. It wasn't necessary to add, containers and other stuff here too, because typically, if you had something like a web deployment and a worker deployment, you would be referencing Docker images and then maybe overriding some commands here with the worker. But yeah, that just wasn't important for the sake of this video here. Likewise with the service, we're just dealing with labels and selectors, and I also just put the port there for why not. But yeah, in that case, it's enough talking here. Let's take a look here at some of these config files, break things down, and start going over how to fix these deprecation warnings here. So we're going to start by looking at the base config file here, or customization.yaml file for the old version. This is producing the output that we just saw here on the left. And yeah, pretty standard customization setup here. We have a couple of different resources. We have that web deployment, worker deployment, service, and this broadcast job here. This could be a job that maybe sends a notification out to Slack or Teams after a deployment goes out. Maybe it's a database migration. Really, it's up to you here. I decided to include it in the example here because, in this real world setup that I had a couple of different overlays for production and staging. And in the production one, we do want to send out a Slack notification out, but in the staging environment, we don't. So in the overlay for the staging environment, that actually deletes this broadcast job here. And that was related to one of the deprecation warnings here. But again, it's nothing to do with broadcasting. It's just deleting a job or any resource that you want, really. But yeah, in this case, we have our web deployment here. Again, super bare bones. There's not even anything really defined here. We just have that name to be app. And then worker is the same thing. The only difference here is the worker name here. And then we have our service, also pretty bare bones, right? Not a lot going on here. We're just mapping this port here. Typically in your deployment, you would have your container listening on a port here, and then that would be mapped up to whatever it happens to be here on this side for the service. And then we have this broadcast job, also again, super basic. We just have the name defined here. The more interesting stuff here for sure is in this customization.yaml file. So again, basic stuff. We have name prefix being hello dash, because if we go and take a look here at some of the names here for the resources, we are adding hello dash here, as well as hello dash over here for the name. But yeah, in that case, that's what that's doing there. And then we have our common labels. There's our strategic merge, as well as patchesJson6902. So let's focus on these one at a time here. And it might be the easiest one to start with would be common labels. And the idea of a common label is quite nice, right? You can just define your map here of your label names as well as your values on, you can have as many as you want on different new lines here. And the idea here is when you go back to the build output, you'll see that these labels, and also in the cases here too for certain resources, the selector as well, they've been added automatically. So we have hello app here for the service. We also have it for the web deployment as well as the worker deployment. Although in this case, this one's being patched with JSON6902 to be a different name. More on that in a bit. But the real takeaway here is common labels is adding all of these labels here for us. And you can imagine on a bigger project where you might have, 8 or 9 or 10 or 4, however many it is, different resources being added here, manually having to go into each of them, adding hello app to each of them would be pretty annoying there. So common labels is really nice. We're not going to lose that behavior. We're just going to implement it in a slightly different way. So if we go to the new folder here and we take a look at the overlay for Kustomize, I'm just going to temporarily copy this one over, bring it over. We'll go over the new one in more details in a bit here. But yeah, let's just put this side by side so we can see. In fact, this is also going to change to true because we'll go over more details later. But in any case here, what you see here selected is going to produce the exact same output as common labels. And I forgot where I read this one. I think it was in some customization or customized pull request or something. But, the team likes to prefer getting rid of duplicate functionality. For example, if common labels is doing this with, this type of definition, but you can achieve the same thing using labels, then, they opt for getting rid of common labels here just so there's one way to do something. Now, this is a little bit more verbose, right? There's a couple more lines that you need to define here, but it's actually, in my opinion, a better solution because you have a lot more flexibility on what you want to do. For example, with common labels, you're going to get both the labels and the selectors here as well. Whereas with labels, you can choose to turn those selectors on or off with a Boolean here. And, it's up to you. And that's actually something we're going to do to solve that JSON6902 problem in a bit here. But you can also choose not to put these labels onto templated resources. For example, for the deployment over here, we've got this little template here. If that template value were set to false, then it just won't add it to here, which is pretty nice. Maybe you have that as a use case that you want. And then, again, here you can just add new lines here for whatever values that you want here. But what's really cool, though, is testing this can be done client side, meaning like you don't really need to, connect to a Kubernetes cluster to see the differences here. For example, if we comment this out and we bring things back to how it was before, and, let's rebuild things, make sure that it works, right? Same output that we saw before, cool. We can actually just output this to a file, let's just call it old output. And then we can bring this back to how it was before and get rid of common labels. We're now performing that refactor. And now when we run this, we can go with, I don't know, like new output, whatever it is, right? And notice here, we're not getting the deprecation warning anymore. But the real nice thing here is you can just run a diff now on new output versus old. And the expectation here is nothing changes. So if you were to apply this to your cluster, your Kubernetes config files that are actually being applied there, they're not changing, so nothing is going to get recreated. However, you just successfully refactored out of using common labels to using labels here with this setup here. So, if you were doing this step by step, that's a good first step that you might want to do here. And that's exactly what I did in all the different applications that I have. But yeah, let's bring this one back to just using common labels, just so this old setup is, focused more on the old there. I guess we'll save JSON6902 to last. Even though it's a little bit related to common labels here, I feel like it's just easier to just pick the low-hanging fruit, sort of, kind of. So patchesStrategicMerge. So if we go to the new setup here, and I'll bring this one up again on the side, you can just have patches defined like this in Kustomize. And this is actually the preferred way to do things. It just takes a list and then you just supply, the path to whatever patch file that you have. In this case, it's sitting in the same directory. And then you have the target. What is it? Is it deployment? Like what's its name? And then, you can just repeat that for different things. So when it came to using patchesStrategicMerge, a couple of years ago, I think it was like around 3 years ago, I started using Kubernetes, whenever it was, this wasn't deprecated. And this just looked really nice to use, like API wise. It's like, well, okay, I have this one delete job patch file here, which we're going to look at in a second. It's just saying patch delete on this file here. And that's why we don't see that in the output when we do a build. And, you can see here, there's no job, right? Without that patch there, then like, for example, if I just commented this out and we rerun this, then we would expect there to see the job and there it is in all its glory. But we don't want that, right? We want it to be deleted. This just looked like a really clean, one-line solution. Like for whatever things that we want to delete or patch, it doesn't need to be a delete. We can just use a strategic merge. But it turns out that you can actually just use the patches syntax here. And, if I just grab the one on the right here and bring this over here, I have to put the patches definition. And then we were to rerun this one, then, this would do the same thing. So if we go back to here and we rerun this one here, you can see the job output isn't there. And we're no longer getting that deprecation warning for patchesStrategicMerge. And there we go. I'm not going to bother doing a diff again, but you can just see that the job isn't there, right? And the job wasn't there up here. Well, it was here because we temporarily added it, but in the original output there, it wasn't there. So that's all you really need to do here for your refactor to get rid of strategic merge. In this case, the kind would be whatever it is. In this case, it's a job. And then the name is app broadcast. And the reason there is because it's named app broadcast over here. And this actual patch file can be used in the same way for both. So that's, again, a pretty easy refactor to do. So let me get rid of that here. I'll just make this an empty list for now, and we'll bring things back to how it was before, just so the old version is all set up for the old stuff. Now, the next one, or the last one, I should say, the patchesJson6902. This one is a little bit more tricky. So for example, if we go into this patch file here, and this is how Kustomize works, right? You can do replacements, you can add things, you can delete things, and you give it a path to where in the Kubernetes config file do you want to actually patch. And in this case, we just wanted to patch this one label, the selector match label name and the metadata here, or the label for the template. And we want those to be hello-worker-app. So if we go back to here and we run this again, then we can see that the deployment for the name, the label here, it's hello worker app, whereas this one, it is just hello app. And that's because, we're only patching the worker here. And this use case is pretty interesting. So we're going to be focusing on one use case, but maybe it applies differently to you. But imagine this. Imagine that you have two different deployments, which we have, right? We have a web and a worker, and you have a service over here. And yeah, the scenario here is that the way these things get linked up is, if we take a look at the output here, we have our deployment and we have a label name hello app on here. And our selector is hello app as well. But if you take a look here at the selector for the service, this selector is looking for a label named hello app. And in this case, what's happening is this deployment for the web application is being linked to this service due to this selector label being the same in both. So its label is hello app and its selector here is hello app for the name. And yeah, you can imagine though, if you have your worker app, if it was also named hello app for the name instead of worker app here, then both deployments, the web and the worker, are going to be linked to this service. And this becomes problematic if you're using something like EKS, which is Amazon's hosted Kubernetes service, and something like the AWS load balancer controller. I can't speak for how other load balancers work. If you had an ingress config set up here, you'd have a load balancer, etc. You can map things to example.com to a specific pod. But in this case, though, the AWS load balancer controller is going to inject or add a health check to your deployment here for the worker. And that's never going to pass because, your web deployment is listening on a port that's linked to the service, but your background worker is not set up like that at all. So you kind of do need a different way to link these and make them more individualized. So, in this case, I chose to name this with a different label. This way the service didn't get picked up. And this technically works, but, this always felt like kind of a hack to me. And also I sort of kind of didn't like it because if you were to, select all the things about an application like the hello app, you would want to get its config map, its deployment. You'd also want to get its background worker, but in this case, that's not going to be picked up because it's named hello worker app instead. So this one required thinking a little bit outside the box, I guess, because you can't just take this and bring it over to patches like we did for strategic merge. And if we try to do that, we'll see what happens here. So let me comment this one out and we'll go and rerun this one and see what happens, or I should say, what doesn't happen. So you can see here, the name is hello worker app, fine, because we have that in the other file. But look at the name here for all the labels here. They're hello app, they're not hello worker app. So, it was like this patch didn't even get applied at all. And it's interesting because, and this is a little bit above my pay grade, I can't really explain it properly, but I feel like JSON6902, like patchesJson6902 and patches both can patch things, but they happen at different points in a life cycle here. And when it comes to patching some selectors, like those are immutable objects, they can't be changed after they've been defined. And I think maybe JSON6902 allows you to do that like before it gets like air quote defined. I don't know. But in any case, I just know this doesn't work, but this does work. But what if you want to get rid of this because you're using like, I don't know, Argo CD application sets where you can only start using customized patches and you can't use strategic merge or JSON6902, like just sticking with this doesn't work, even though theoretically you might be able to use this for, some years in the future even. That required thinking about this one a little bit different, and it may be a little bit different for your use case, but here's how I ended up solving this one. And this will be a little bit easier if we take a look at the new setup. And I will mention that the base stuff here for the new folder is all the same. Most of the stuff is the same here as well. But if we take a look here at the customization.yaml, notice the JSON6902 isn't there anymore. And what I ended up doing here was, actually, it might be easier if we take a look at the build first. So let me build this one. And then we take a look at the output, and it's pretty similar, although different. So, we still do have two deployments for the web application and the background worker and the service here as well. Notice how we're not getting any deprecation warnings now, so we're in the clear. But yeah, what I ended up doing here was introducing a new label called tier. Now, in like the Kubernetes documentation, like tier is like a popular name to use for this thing, but it could be like front end or back end or whatever. I'm just using tier as a placeholder for like web or worker or whatever it happens to be here. But in this case here, look at the background worker. The nice thing now is the name is called hello app. So it actually has the same label as the web deployment as well as the service. That's cool. So we solved one of those like hacky problems. Now the background worker would be picked up if you were doing a search on a label like hello app, which is cool. And yeah, if you take a look really at the deployment for the web application, that's where most of the differences are. There is another difference with the service too. But yeah, we added this tier label, and then this one is called hello web app. And for the match label selector, it's also hello web app. And then also for the template for the pod that gets created from this deployment, then that is going to also have the tier hello web app. And then if we take a look here at the service, it's still hello app up here, but however, the selector is now selecting on the tier label hello web app, which is only going to match the web application deployment here. It is not going to match the worker deployment. So now things are really good to go. And then we can just use regular patches here. If we take a look here for the web patch, for this one customization one here, I have it defined here as a regular patch. If we take a look at this one, we are just adding the label, selector match label, and template label here for the tier. And since we're doing an add, not a replace, that's totally fine. Patches can do that. So we're just adding these three here, hello web app, and we're done. And then when it comes to the worker, we actually do need to add this one selector here, this match label here for hello app on the name, because, going back to our customization before, I did make this one alteration here where, selectors for the common label refactor, it's no longer going to be adding selectors by default, which I actually think is pretty good, because now it really means that it's up to us now to add these selectors to the resources that actually need it. So in this case, we have a new patch file here too for the service. So we are adding that selector here to be hello web app. And then for the deployment web, we are adding that selector to be hello web app. And yeah, in that case, it's also matched on the tier here. One I should mention here too. I don't know if you caught that, but yeah, it's for tier up here. However, the worker one, we have to add a selector here too as well. This one is going to be named hello app for the name, not the tier. And that's how we get all things working the way we want. And again, maybe your use case is going to be a little different, but that's how you can potentially solve this type of problem. And yeah, again, you can use the diff tool to output the before and after. In this case, it would be expected that you get different outputs, right? Because, this is not in the old setup, but it's in the new setup. But I just wanted to say that, yeah, this is a nice way to test things. And I will mention this though, before we wrap up here, when you actually go and roll this thing out to a cluster, those selectors are immutable, meaning you can't just change a deployment's value from an old value to a new value. I ended up having to actually delete this deployment entirely and create a new one, which did produce a tiny bit of downtime, but you could have maybe worked around that one by just adding the new labels instead of replacing them. And then that could have been a little bit, I don't know. In my mind, that's like accumulating technical debt. If you wanted to do it incrementally, you could do it that way. But I was okay with eating the 20 seconds of downtime to make that. So I just didn't want that to be a surprise to you when you try to apply this live to a Kubernetes cluster in production, and then you get that immutable selector error that would prevent the deployment from going out. Your old app would still be up, it wouldn't go down. So, you wouldn't necessarily have downtime due to a broken config, but definitely worth noting there. So yeah, with that said, all these config files, all the diffs, it's linked in the blog post that will be available in the description. Let us know in the comments below what type of refactories did you have to do in your customized setup to get rid of those deprecation warnings. And, if you have any questions, let us know in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer all of them. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up because it really does help a lot. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next video.